They say blood is thicker than water, that family will always support your dreams no matter how impossible they seem. But what happens when the person who's supposed to believe in you the most becomes your biggest skeptic? What happens when your own sister calls your life's work a pathetic fantasy and tells everyone you're living in a delusional bubble? What happens when she spends years undermining your confidence, sabotaging your opportunities, and convincing your entire family that you're an embarrassment, only to wake up one morning and see your name listed on the New York Stock Exchange as the majority owner of a company now valued at over $300 million? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Amelia Rodriguez, and I'm a 31-year-old entrepreneur from Phoenix, Arizona. For 7 years, I watched my sister Veronica systematically destroy my self-confidence, poison my family relationships, and convince everyone around me that my tech startup was nothing more than an expensive hobby that would never amount to anything. She called my business meetings pretend CEO time, referred to my investors as imaginary friends, and told our parents I was having a mental breakdown every time I tried to explain my company's progress. But when that notification pinged on my phone at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, showing me that TechVantage Solutions had just gone public with the largest IPO debut in our sector's history, and my name was listed as the majority shareholder of a company now valued at over $300 million, I realized that sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest become the most silent when success speaks for itself. Before we dive into this incredible journey of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate vindication, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had family members doubt your dreams, make sure you're subscribed because this story is going to show you exactly what's possible when you refuse to let anyone, even your own blood, define your worth. Hit that notification bell because tomorrow I've got something even more shocking lined up for you. This is the story of how my sister tried to destroy my dreams by convincing everyone they were fake, and how her own jealousy and sabotage became the fuel that drove me to build something bigger than she could ever imagine. It's about family betrayal, the price of ambition, and what happens when the person you love most becomes the obstacle you have to overcome to reach your destiny. When people ask me about my relationship with Veronica before everything changed, I tell them it was like having a shadow that followed me everywhere, always there, always dark, and always reminding me of everything I wasn't. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Scottsdale, we were the Rodriguez sisters, born just 2 years apart, but we might as well have been from different planets. Veronica was everything our parents wanted in a daughter. She was beautiful with the kind of effortless charm that made teachers love her and boys follow her around like lost puppies. She got straight A's without trying, was captain of the cheerleading squad, and had already been accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship by the time she was 17. She was the golden child, the success story, the one who made our parents beam with pride at every family gathering. I was the other one. The dreamer, the girl who spent more time coding in her bedroom than socializing at parties. While Veronica was winning homecoming queen, I was building websites for local businesses and dreaming about Silicon Valley. Our parents loved me, but they worried about me. Amelia's very creative, they'd say, which was their polite way of saying they thought I was wasting my potential on fantasies that would never amount to anything. When I graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in computer science and immediately started talking about launching my own tech company, Veronica's reaction was swift and devastating. "Leah," she said, using the childhood nickname that somehow sounded condescending when she said it, "you can't just skip the part where you get a real job and gain actual experience. Starting a company isn't playing pretend CEO in your apartment." But it wasn't just the dismissive comments that hurt. It was the systematic way she undermined every milestone I achieved. When I secured my first round of seed funding from a local investor group, Veronica told our parents it was probably a scam and I was being taken advantage of by con artists. When I hired my first 2 employees, she suggested they were just probably friends I was paying to make my hobby look legitimate. When I landed my first major contract agreement, she implied that I must have exaggerated my company's capabilities and would probably get sued when I couldn't deliver. She made sure her eye roll was perfectly visible during family dinners when I talked about Lucky Light in Scandinavia or CiteTheKids.com, and always made sure to add a condescending remark about how my little websites weren't going to change the world like her medical research was. The psychological impact was devastating. Here I was, working 16-hour days, sacrificing my social life, pouring every dollar I had into building something meaningful, and the person whose opinion mattered most to me was telling everyone who would listen that I was delusional. Veronica had a way of making her criticism sound like loving concern, which made it impossible to defend against without looking defensive or unstable. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Leah," she'd say with perfectly performed sympathy whenever family members questioned her constant negativity about my business. Sometimes people get so invested in their dreams that they can't see reality anymore. I'm just trying to help her stay grounded. But staying grounded, in Veronica's definition, meant giving up everything I'd worked for and accepting a traditional corporate job where I'd spend my life making other people's dreams come true instead of my own. She'd send me job postings for entry-level positions at established tech companies, emphasizing the steady salary and benefits package while implying that my startup was a risky fantasy that was preventing me from building a stable life. The family dynamics became increasingly toxic as my business actually started growing. Every success I achieved was minimized or explained away by Veronica's alternative narrative. When TechVantage Solutions landed a contract with a Fortune 500 company, she told our parents the client was probably just testing out small vendors and would drop us as soon as they found a real company to work with. When we expanded to 15 employees, she suggested we were probably burning through investor money unsustainably and would crash within 6 months. What made Veronica's sabotage particularly effective was her insider knowledge of my insecurities and fears. She knew exactly which doubts to amplify and which achievements to dismiss. As someone who'd shared a bedroom with me for 18 years, she understood my psychological vulnerabilities better than anyone else. She wielded that knowledge like a surgeon's scalpel, making precise cuts designed to damage my confidence without leaving obvious wounds. The breaking point in our relationship came during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, when TechVantage was experiencing rapid growth, but still facing the cash flow challenges that every scaling startup encounters. I'd been working day and night to secure our Series A funding round, and I was exhausted, stressed, and probably more vulnerable than I should have been in a family setting. Our extended family was gathered around the dinner table, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all eager to hear updates about both of their nieces' lives. Veronica, who was then working as a senior marketing director at a prestigious consulting firm in Los Angeles, regaled everyone with stories about her corporate successes, her luxury apartment, and her stable 6-figure salary. When the conversation turned to me, I tried to share some of the exciting developments at TechVantage, our recent product launch, the positive user feedback we were receiving, and the interest we were getting from potential investors. But Veronica interrupted me with a laugh that cut through the room like breaking glass. "Oh, Leah," she said, shaking her head with what looked like affectionate exasperation, "you've been saying the same things about your little project for years. At some point, don't you think it's time to admit that this isn't working and find something more realistic?" The table went silent. I felt every pair of eyes looking at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. In that moment, surrounded by family members who were clearly questioning whether I was living in a fantasy world, I realized that Veronica hadn't just been criticizing my business. She'd been systematically destroying my credibility with everyone who mattered to me. But what Veronica didn't know as she sat there basking in the approval of our relatives while I fought back tears of humiliation was that 3 days earlier, I'd received a term sheet from Crestwood Ventures, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country. They were offering to lead our Series A round with a valuation that would make TechVantage Solutions one of the fastest-growing startups in our sector.
What she also didn't know was that embedded in that term sheet were provisions for an eventual public offering, with preliminary projections that would make me not just successful, but wealthy beyond anything our family had ever imagined. That Thanksgiving dinner became the moment I stopped trying to prove myself to Veronica and started building something that would prove itself. The humiliation I felt that night became the fuel that drove me through the next 18 months of brutal work, impossible deadlines, and the kind of strategic decisions that separate successful entrepreneurs from those who give up when the pressure becomes overwhelming. Veronica thought she was protecting our family from my inevitable failure. Instead, she was about to witness a success story that would redefine everything they thought they knew about dreams, determination, and the difference between playing it safe and playing to win. The girl she dismissed as a delusional dreamer was about to become the majority owner of a publicly traded company. And the sister who'd spent years calling my business fake was about to learn what real success actually looks like.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. To understand how devastating Veronica's betrayal became, you need to understand what our relationship was like before business success became the wedge that split our family apart. Growing up, Veronica wasn't just my older sister. She was my hero, my role model, and the person I desperately wanted to impress more than anyone else in the world. Our childhood home in Scottsdale was a modest 4-bedroom ranch house on Maple Ridge Drive, where our father, Carlos Rodriguez, worked as a high school math teacher and our mother, Rosa, managed the office for a local pediatric clinic. They'd immigrated from Mexico before Veronica was born, building a middle-class life through sheer determination and the kind of work ethic they instilled in both their daughters from an early age. Veronica was born to succeed. From the moment she could walk, she displayed the kind of natural charisma and intelligence that made adults stop and take notice. She was speaking in complete sentences before her 2nd birthday, reading chapter books by age 5, and solving math problems that kids 3 grades older struggled with. But unlike many gifted children who become socially awkward, Veronica seemed to excel at everything: academics, sports, social situations, and leadership roles. I was born 2 years later, and while I was certainly bright, I existed in Veronica's shadow from day one. Teachers would light up when they heard my last name, expecting another Rodriguez prodigy, then try to hide their disappointment when I turned out to be merely above average rather than exceptional. Amelia is very creative became the polite way everyone described me, which I learned was code for not as brilliant as her sister, but we're sure she'll find her own path eventually. But here's what made our relationship special in those early years. Veronica never made me feel less than. Despite being the golden child who could do no wrong, she was genuinely protective of me and proud of my different strengths. When kids at school teased me for being the weird computer girl who preferred coding to playground games, Veronica would shut them down with the kind of social authority that only popular kids possess. "My sister is going to be famous someday," she'd tell anyone who questioned my obsession with technology. "She's building things you can't even imagine." Those words meant everything to me. Having Veronica's approval felt like having a superpower. If the most successful, most admired person I knew believed in my potential, then maybe all those hours I spent learning programming languages and dreaming about Silicon Valley weren't just the fantasies of a socially awkward teenager. Veronica's high school years were like watching someone live a perfectly scripted movie. She was valedictorian, homecoming queen, and captain of both the debate team and the varsity soccer team. She dated the quarterback, a genuinely nice guy named Ryan who treated her like a princess and treated me like the little sister he'd never had. She won every academic award the school offered and received scholarship offers from 7 different universities. But what impressed me most wasn't her achievements. It was how effortlessly she handled success. Veronica never seemed stressed or overwhelmed by her packed schedule. She'd come home from soccer practice, knock out her AP homework in an hour, help me with my own assignments, and still have energy to watch movies with our parents. She made excellence look easy, which both inspired and intimidated me. When Veronica left for Stanford on a full academic scholarship, our house felt like it lost its gravitational center. Our parents were incredibly proud, but also clearly worried about how they'd manage without their perfect daughter around to set the standard for success. I was devastated to lose my biggest supporter, but also secretly relieved to finally have space to develop my own identity without constant comparison to Veronica's achievements. During her college years, Veronica thrived exactly as everyone expected. She double majored in business administration and psychology, maintained a 3.9 GPA, and landed internships at prestigious consulting firms every summer. She joined the right sorority, dated the right guys, and built the kind of network that would serve her throughout her career. Her Instagram feed looked like a recruitment brochure for the American dream. Beautiful campus shots, formal events, internship celebrations, and study abroad adventures in Europe. Meanwhile, I was having a very different college experience at Arizona State University. While Veronica was networking at Stanford Business Mixers, I was pulling all-nighters in the computer lab, building websites for local businesses, and dreaming about starting my own tech company. I wasn't joining sororities or dating much. I was obsessed with learning everything I could about software development, user experience design, and a startup ecosystem that was exploding in Silicon Valley. The first crack in our relationship appeared during Veronica's junior year at Stanford. I'd built a mobile app as a class project that ended up getting featured in a local tech blog and attracting interest from a few small investors. I was incredibly excited and called Veronica immediately to share the news, expecting her to be proud of my first real entrepreneurial success.
Instead, her response was lukewarm and slightly condescending. "That's nice, Leah," she said, but I could hear something in her voice I'd never heard before when she talked about my achievements. "Just make sure you're not getting ahead of yourself. Building one app doesn't make you the next Steve Jobs." The comment stung because it felt so unlike the sister who'd always been my biggest cheerleader. But I chalked it up to stress from her own demanding schedule and didn't think much more about it at the time. When Veronica graduated from Stanford and landed a prestigious position at Morrison & Associates, one of the most exclusive consulting firms in Los Angeles, our parents threw her a celebration party that felt more like a wedding reception than a graduation event. Extended family came from 3 different states, neighbors brought congratulatory gifts, and everyone spent the evening marveling at how successful and sophisticated Veronica had become. I was genuinely proud of her accomplishments, but I also couldn't help noticing that my own graduation from ASU the following year felt like a much smaller affair. The party was nice, but it lacked the sense of community celebration that had surrounded Veronica's achievements. It was the first time I really understood that our family and our extended community had very different expectations for each of us. Veronica was supposed to be the success story, the proof that hard work and traditional excellence could lead to the American dream. I was the creative one, the wild card, the sister who might do something interesting, but probably wouldn't achieve the kind of conventional success that made parents brag to their friends. But what our family didn't understand, and what Veronica was about to discover, was that I'd spent my college years building something much bigger than a traditional career path. While she was climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison & Associates, I was laying the foundation for Tech Vantage Solutions, a company that would eventually grow into something that none of them could have imagined. The sister they saw as the safe bet was about to learn that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards. And the golden child, who'd never failed at anything, was about to face her first real challenge, watching her supposedly less successful little sister build something that would dwarf every achievement she'd ever celebrated. But first, I had to survive the systematic campaign of doubt and sabotage that was about to begin, because success was about to transform my protective big sister into my most dangerous critic. And the person who'd once believed in my potential was about to spend years trying to convince everyone, including me, that my dreams were nothing more than expensive delusions. The perfect sister was about to reveal that perfection sometimes hides the deepest insecurities,
and that blood may be thicker than water, but it's not always stronger than jealousy. The transformation in Veronica's attitude toward my business didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical erosion of support that began so subtly I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The first real warning sign came 6 months after I officially launched TechVantage Solutions, when what should have been a celebration of my first major milestone became the beginning of a pattern that would nearly destroy my confidence. I just signed my first corporate client, Henderson Manufacturing, a mid-sized company in Tempe that needed a complete overhaul of their inventory management system. The contract was worth $45,000, more money than I'd ever made in my life, and proof that my business wasn't just a hobby, but a legitimate enterprise that could solve real problems for real companies. I was so excited that I drove straight to Veronica's luxury apartment in Beverly Hills to share the news in person. She'd moved there after getting promoted to senior associate at Morrison & Associates, and her place was everything you'd expect from a successful consultant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, designer furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a kitchen that probably cost more than most people's cars. When I burst through her door with champagne and a printout of the signed contract, I expected the old Veronica, the sister who'd always been my biggest cheerleader, who'd celebrated every small victory in my coding journey throughout high school and college. Instead, I found someone who looked at my excitement with what I can only describe as polite tolerance. "That's great, Leah," she said, accepting the champagne but not opening it. $45,000 is definitely nothing to sneeze at. The way she said it made my achievement sound small, almost insignificant. When I tried to explain how competitive the bidding process had been, how Henderson Manufacturing had chosen my proposal over 3 larger established firms, Veronica nodded with the kind of patronizing smile you'd give a child showing off a finger painting. "I'm sure you worked very hard on your proposal, but you should be careful about celebrating too early. Landing one client doesn't guarantee you'll be able to replicate that success. Most small businesses fail within the first 2 years because they can't scale beyond their initial contracts."
Her words hit like cold water on my celebration. This wasn't constructive advice from an experienced business professional. It was designed to diminish my achievement and plant seeds of doubt about my long-term prospects. But because it came wrapped in the language of sisterly concern, I couldn't call it out without seeming ungrateful or defensive. "I know it's just the beginning," I said, trying to maintain my enthusiasm. "But this proves that the business model works. Henderson's CTO said my solution was more innovative than anything the bigger firms proposed." Veronica's smile became even more strained. "Innovation is great, but clients care more about reliability and established track records. They might be taking a chance on you now, but when renewal time comes, they'll probably want to work with a more established company." Every sentence was calculated to undermine my confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. If I accused her of being unsupportive, she could point to her practical advice and realistic expectations. But the underlying message was clear. My success was temporary, my business was unsustainable, and I was naive to think otherwise. The pattern escalated when I hired my first employee, a brilliant developer named Derek Chen, who just graduated from UC Berkeley. Derek was exactly what TechVantage needed, someone with fresh ideas and the technical skills to help us scale our operations. His hiring represented a major milestone, transforming my one-person operation into an actual company with employees and growth potential. When I told Veronica about Derek during one of our weekly phone calls, her response was immediate and cutting. "Are you sure you can afford to hire someone already? Most startups burn through their capital too quickly by expanding before they have sustainable revenue streams." "I've done the math," I explained. "Derek's salary is covered by the Henderson contract, and I have 3 other prospects in the pipeline." "Prospects aren't guaranteed income," Veronica replied. "And hiring friends fresh out of college doesn't exactly scream professional credibility to potential clients." The implication stung. Derek wasn't a friend. He was a highly qualified candidate I'd recruited through a competitive process. But Veronica's comment made it sound like I was playing business with my college buddies rather than making strategic hiring decisions based on actual business needs. What made these conversations particularly insidious was Veronica's tone. She never raised her voice or said anything overtly cruel. Instead, she delivered each criticism with the patient concern of someone trying to protect me from inevitable disappointment. It was emotional manipulation disguised as sisterly wisdom, and it was incredibly effective. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. After each conversation with Veronica, I'd find myself second-guessing decisions I'd felt confident about moments earlier. When Derek suggested we pursue a more aggressive marketing strategy, I wondered if Veronica was right about moving too fast. When potential clients praised our innovative approach, I worried they were just being polite before choosing more established competitors. The worst part was how Veronica's criticism affected my family relationships. During family dinners and holiday gatherings, she'd make seemingly innocent comments that undermined my credibility with our parents and extended relatives. "Leah's little tech company is doing well," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She landed her first paying client a few months ago. We're all very proud of her for taking such a big risk." The words sounded supportive, but the subtext was clear. My business was little, my client was singular rather than plural, and my career was a risk rather than a strategic decision. She'd position herself as the responsible sister who supported my dreams while subtly reinforcing the narrative that those dreams were unrealistic. Our parents, who already struggled to understand the tech industry, began viewing my business through Veronica's lens. They'd ask questions like, "When are you going to look for a more stable job?" And "Don't you think it's time to consider backup plans?" These weren't their own concerns. They were Veronica's doubts, planted and cultivated through months of subtle suggestion. The breaking point in this early phase of her campaign came when I received my first round of seed funding. I'd spent months developing a comprehensive business plan, creating detailed financial projections, and pitching to local angel investors. When Phoenix Ventures offered to lead a $200,000 funding round, it was validation that professional investors saw the same potential in TechVantage that I'd been describing to my family for months. I called Veronica immediately, certain that this news would finally convince her to take my business seriously. Professional investors don't throw around six-figure investments lightly. Their due diligence process was thorough and rigorous, and their offer came with terms that reflected genuine confidence in our growth potential. "Congratulations," she said when I finished explaining the funding offer. "$200,000 is definitely a significant amount of money." I waited for more enthusiasm, for some acknowledgement that this represented a major milestone in my entrepreneurial journey. Instead, there was a long pause before she continued. "I just hope you're being careful about the terms," she said. "A lot of these small investment groups prey on inexperienced entrepreneurs. They offer funding with conditions that essentially give them control of your company, then push you out once you've done the hard work of building something valuable." Once again, what should have been a celebration became an opportunity for Veronica to plant doubt and fear. She wasn't questioning specific terms in my deal. She was suggesting that I was too naive to recognize predatory investors, too inexperienced to protect my own interests. "I had a lawyer review everything," I said, trying to maintain my excitement in the face of her skepticism. "The terms are actually quite favorable for early-stage funding." "I'm sure your lawyer is competent," Veronica replied, "but small-town attorneys don't always understand the complexity of venture capital deals. You might want to get a second opinion from someone who specializes in this kind of thing." The implication was clear. I was operating outside my depth, making decisions without proper expertise, setting myself up for failure through inexperience and poor judgment. Every piece of advice sounded reasonable on the surface, but the cumulative effect was to make me question every aspect of my business strategy. Looking back now, I can see how masterfully Veronica was executing her psychological campaign.
She never told me to quit or give up directly. That would have been too obvious and would have positioned her as the villain in our family's eyes. Instead, she chipped away at my confidence through 1,000 small cuts, each delivered with the caring tone of someone trying to protect me from harsh realities. But what Veronica didn't realize was that her constant negativity was starting to have the opposite effect she intended. Instead of convincing me to abandon my dreams, her criticism was teaching me to trust my own judgment over external opinions. Each time she predicted failure and I proved her wrong, I became more confident in my ability to succeed despite the doubts of others. The seed funding was just the beginning. Henderson Manufacturing had already become a reference client that opened doors to bigger opportunities. Derek had proven to be an exceptional hire whose contributions were accelerating our development timeline. And the investors who Veronica had suggested might be predatory were actually providing valuable mentorship and industry connections that were helping TechVantage grow faster than I'd ever imagined possible. But Veronica couldn't see, or chose not to see, the mounting evidence of my success. She was too invested in the narrative that I was an impractical dreamer who needed her protection from inevitable disappointment. That investment in my failure was about to become the driving force behind an escalation in her sabotage efforts that would test every aspect of our relationship and ultimately reveal the true depth of her insecurity and jealousy. What started as subtle criticism evolved into something far more sinister during TechVantage's second year of operations. As my company continued to grow and attract attention, Veronica's sabotage efforts became more systematic, more calculated, and infinitely more destructive. She wasn't just questioning my decisions anymore, she was actively working to undermine my opportunities and destroy my professional credibility within our family and social networks. The escalation began when I was invited to speak at the Southwest Technology Summit in Austin, Texas. This wasn't some small local meetup. It was a major industry conference that attracted CEOs, investors, and thought leaders from across the region. Being selected as a keynote speaker at age 26 was a huge honor, especially for someone running a company that was barely 18 months old. The conference organizers had specifically requested me to speak about innovative solutions for legacy system integration, recognizing TechVantage as a rising star in our sector. I was scheduled to present alongside executives from companies like Dell, IBM, and Oracle, names that represented the pinnacle of tech industry success. This wasn't just a speaking opportunity, it was a chance to establish myself as a serious player in an industry dominated by much larger, more established firms. The exposure could lead to partnerships, investment opportunities, and the kind of credibility that would take TechVantage to the next level. When I shared this news during our monthly dinner, expecting celebration and support, Veronica's response was swift and devastating. Instead of congratulating me on this incredible opportunity, she immediately began dissecting why I'd been chosen and questioning whether I was qualified to represent myself on such a prominent stage. "That's interesting that they invited you," she said, her tone suggesting surprise rather than pride. "I wonder if they needed to fill a diversity quota, or if there was a last-minute cancellation. Sometimes these conferences scramble to find speakers when their first choices can't make it." The implication was that I hadn't earned this opportunity through merit, but had been selected as a backup option or token representative. She continued before I could respond, building on her narrative of my inadequacy.
"I hope you're not planning to oversell your company's capabilities," she added with mock concern. "When you're speaking alongside executives from Fortune 500 companies, you'll need to be very careful about making claims you can't substantiate. The tech industry is notorious for calling out entrepreneurs who exaggerate their achievements." What made this particularly cruel was that Veronica delivered these comments in front of our entire extended family during our monthly gathering at our Aunt Carmen's house in Phoenix.
Our parents, grandparents, and various cousins were all present, creating an audience for her systematic destruction of what should have been a moment of family celebration. Our father, Carlos, had been beaming with pride when I first announced the speaking invitation. Mi hija, speaking at a conference with IBM and Oracle? This is incredible. But Veronica's comments immediately planted seeds of doubt about whether this opportunity was as impressive as it seemed. Well, our mother Rosa said hesitantly, Veronica has experience with these kinds of business presentations. Maybe you should ask her for advice about how to prepare. This was exactly what Veronica had been angling for, positioning herself as the expert whose guidance I needed to avoid embarrassing myself and our family. She graciously offered to help me refine my presentation, suggesting that my technical expertise might not translate effectively to a business audience. But the speaking engagement was just the beginning of her escalated campaign. When TechVantage landed our second major contract with Pinnacle Logistics, a regional transportation company that needed a complete digital transformation of their fleet management system, Veronica's response revealed the true depth of her resentment toward my success. The Pinnacle contract was worth $120,000 and represented a significant leap in complexity from our previous projects. Their existing systems were a nightmare of incompatible software platforms and manual processes that were costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars annually in inefficiencies. My team had proposed an integrated solution that would automate their entire operation, from route optimization to driver scheduling to maintenance tracking. More importantly, Pinnacle CEO, Janet Morrison, had specifically sought us out after hearing about our work with Henderson Manufacturing. This wasn't a desperate startup begging for clients. This was an established company actively pursuing TechVantage because of our growing reputation for innovative solutions. When I mentioned the Pinnacle contract during one of our weekly phone calls, Veronica's reaction was immediate and predictable. But this time, she didn't just question my competence, she began actively spreading doubt about my business in our professional and social networks. I'm worried about Amelia, she told our cousin Patricia, who worked in marketing for a large Phoenix-based company. She's taking on projects that are way beyond her experience level. I'm afraid she's setting herself up for a catastrophic failure that could ruin her reputation permanently. Patricia, who'd always looked up to Veronica as the successful corporate executive in our family, immediately began questioning whether she should recommend TechVantage to her own company's IT department as she had been considering. Veronica's concerns seemed genuine and well-informed, coming from someone with an MBA and years of consulting experience. But Veronica's sabotage extended beyond family members. She began reaching out to people in my professional network, positioning herself as a concerned sister who was trying to protect me from taking on commitments I couldn't fulfill. She contacted Derek's former professors at UC Berkeley, suggesting that they might want to check on their alumnus who was working for a very small startup that might not be providing appropriate career development opportunities. She even went so far as to research my investors, then cold-called contacts at Morrison & Associates who had connections to the venture capital community. Under the guise of seeking advice about how to support her entrepreneurial sister, she planted stories about my supposed inexperience and the risks associated with early-stage technology investments. My little sister has this tech startup. I'm so proud of her ambition, but I worry that she might be in over her head. She's taking on enterprise clients without really understanding the complexities of large-scale implementations. I'm trying to figure out how to guide her toward more realistic opportunities without crushing her spirit. These conversations were masterfully crafted character assassinations disguised as sisterly concern. Veronica never said anything overtly negative about me or TechVantage, but she painted a picture of a naive entrepreneur who needed protection from her own ambitious overreach. Coming from someone with her credentials and reputation, these concerns carried significant weight with business professionals who had no independent knowledge of my actual capabilities. The most devastating aspect of this campaign was how it affected my relationship with our parents. Veronica's constant expressions of worry began influencing how Carlos and Rosa viewed my business success. They started asking questions that reflected her concerns rather than celebrating my achievements.
Mija, our father said during a private conversation, Veronica mentioned that you might be taking on too much too quickly. Maybe you should slow down and focus on smaller projects until you have more experience. Are you sure you're not borrowing too much money from investors? Our mother added. Veronica said that many startups fail because they spend money they don't really have. These weren't their organic concerns. They were Veronica's fears, systematically planted and cultivated until our parents began viewing my rapid growth as reckless risk-taking rather than entrepreneurial success. Every milestone I achieved was reframed as evidence of dangerous overextension rather than proof of my company's viability. The psychological impact was devastating. I found myself constantly defending decisions that had proven successful, explaining achievements that should have spoken for themselves. Veronica had created an environment where my family expected me to fail, where every success was viewed as a step closer to inevitable disaster. But perhaps most insidiously, her campaign was beginning to affect my own confidence. When potential clients expressed interest in TechVantage's services, I caught myself wondering if we were really qualified for their projects. When investors suggested expansion opportunities, I hesitated because Veronica's voice in my head whispered that I was moving too fast, taking on too much, setting myself up for catastrophic failure. The breaking point came when Southwest Airlines, one of the largest carriers in the United States, reached out about a potential partnership. Their technology director had attended my Austin presentation and was impressed with our approach to legacy system integration. They were facing exactly the kind of challenges that TechVantage specialized in solving, and they wanted to discuss a pilot program that could potentially lead to a multi-million-dollar contract. This was the opportunity every tech entrepreneur dreams of, a chance to work with a Fortune 500 company that could transform our business overnight. But instead of feeling excited and confident, I found myself paralyzed by doubt. Veronica's months of systematic undermining had finally achieved their intended effect. I was questioning whether I was qualified for the success that was being offered to me. The Southwest opportunity represented everything I'd worked for, but Veronica's campaign had planted so much doubt in my mind that I almost convinced myself to turn it down. Almost. Because buried underneath all her criticism and sabotage was the stubborn determination that had driven me to start TechVantage in the first place, the refusal to let anyone, even my own sister, define the limits of what I could achieve. But accepting the Southwest opportunity would require more than just business acumen and technical expertise. It would require the emotional strength to bet on myself, despite months of systematic attempts to destroy my confidence. And it would mark the beginning of a success story so dramatic that even Veronica's most creative sabotage efforts would be powerless to diminish its impact. The moment that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November when I stumbled upon evidence that transformed my understanding of Veronica's behavior from sibling rivalry into something far more calculated and malicious. What I discovered that night didn't just explain her systematic campaign against my business, it revealed a level of betrayal so profound that it shattered every assumption I held about my sister and our relationship. I'd driven to Los Angeles for a client meeting with Pacific Coast Entertainment, a major production company that was considering TechVantage for a complete overhaul of their content management systems. The meeting had gone exceptionally well, so well that their CTO had asked me to extend my stay to present to their full executive team the following morning. With less than 12 hours' notice, I needed somewhere to stay overnight, and Veronica's Beverly Hills apartment was the obvious solution. When I called her around 7 p.m., she didn't answer, which was unusual, given her demanding work schedule at Morrison & Associates. I decided to drive over anyway, knowing she kept a spare key hidden in a decorative planter outside her building's entrance. We'd established this arrangement years earlier for emergencies, and she'd always told me I was welcome to use her place whenever I was in town for business. Veronica's apartment was dark when I arrived, confirming that she was working late or out at one of the networking events that seemed to consume most of her evenings. I let myself in, planning to grab a quick shower and prepare for my morning presentation before she returned home. Her apartment was immaculate, as always, every surface perfectly organized, every piece of furniture positioned with the precision of a magazine photo shoot. But something felt different that night.
Maybe it was the stress of the important presentation ahead, or maybe it was the months of accumulated tension from her constant criticism. But I found myself really looking at Veronica's space with fresh eyes. The apartment was beautiful, but sterile. Expensive, but somehow lacking any sense of warmth or personality. It was the home of someone who valued appearance over authenticity, success over substance.
I was settling into her guest bedroom when I heard the distinctive chime of an email notification coming from her home office. The sound repeated several times in quick succession, suggesting multiple messages arriving simultaneously. Normally, I would have ignored it completely. Veronica's work correspondence was none of my business. But one of the notification sounds was different, more like a text message alert. And it was coming from a device I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked toward the office, intending only to close the door to muffle the sounds so I could concentrate on my presentation materials. But when I peered into the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Veronica's home office contained far more technology than any marketing consultant would need for their work. There were 3 separate computer monitors, 2 different laptops, several phones, and what appeared to be a sophisticated recording setup with professional-grade audio equipment. But most shocking was what was displayed on the main monitor. A detailed spreadsheet with my name at the top containing information about TechVantage that I'd never shared with anyone. My hands shook as I moved closer to examine the screen. The spreadsheet contained columns for client names, contract values, project timelines, and potential vulnerabilities. Every major client TechVantage had worked with was listed, along with accurate contact amounts and project details that only someone with inside access to my business could have known. But the potential vulnerabilities column was what made me feel physically sick. Veronica had documented weaknesses in each client relationship, areas where she believed my company was exposed to criticism or failure. Next to the Henderson manufacturing entry, she'd written, small team, potential for missed deadlines. For Pinnacle Logistics, complex integration, high risk of scope creep. For Pacific Coast Entertainment, the client I was meeting with tomorrow, she'd noted, entertainment industry notorious for payment delays, could create cash flow crisis. This wasn't just casual observation or sisterly concern. This was systematic intelligence gathering with the clear intent of identifying ways to undermine my business relationships. But the spreadsheet was only the beginning of what I discovered that night. Additional files on her computer revealed the true scope of her campaign against me. She'd created detailed profiles of my key employees, including Derek Chen, with notes about their backgrounds, career aspirations, and potential motivations for leaving TechVantage. She'd researched my investors, documenting their other portfolio companies and investment criteria. She even compiled a list of my competitors, complete with their strengths and competitive advantages. Most damning was a folder labeled Intervention Strategy that contained drafts of emails and letters she'd never sent but had clearly considered sending. One draft was addressed to Janet Morrison at Pinnacle Logistics, expressing concerns about the oversight and project management capabilities of TechVantage Solutions. Another was written to my primary investor at Phoenix Ventures, suggesting that they might want to conduct additional due diligence on the management team's experience level. These weren't just thoughts or concerns, they were weapons, carefully crafted and strategically targeted to destroy specific aspects of my business. The fact that she'd drafted them but not sent them suggested she was waiting for the right moment to deploy them for maximum impact. But the most devastating discovery was a series of voice recordings stored in a separate folder. Veronica had been recording our phone conversations for months, capturing every moment of vulnerability, every expression of doubt, every admission of stress or uncertainty about business decisions.
She'd edited these recordings to create a narrative of incompetence and instability, removing context and splicing together statements that made me sound like someone having a psychological breakdown. The implications were staggering. Veronica hadn't just been passively criticizing my business, she'd been actively gathering evidence to use against me. Every conversation we'd had, every moment of sisterly confidence I'd shared, every vulnerability I'd expressed had been weaponized and prepared for deployment in her campaign to destroy my credibility. But perhaps most chilling was a document labeled Timeline and Targets that laid out her long-term strategy for undermining TechVantage. The document revealed that she'd been planning her campaign for over a year, identifying key moments when intervention would be most effective. She'd targeted my speaking engagement at the Southwest Technology Summit, my major client contracts, and even my investor relationships with surgical precision.
The document also revealed her ultimate goal. She wanted me to fail spectacularly and publicly, then return to the family as a humbled prodigal daughter who would be grateful for her guidance and support. She'd written, "After the inevitable collapse, A will need family support to rebuild her life. This will provide opportunity to guide her toward more realistic career path and restore family dynamics to proper balance." The phrase proper balance told me everything I needed to know about Veronica's motivation. She couldn't tolerate my success because it disrupted the family narrative where she was the achiever and I was the dreamer. My business success threatened her identity as the responsible, successful sister, and she was willing to destroy my livelihood to maintain that dynamic. As I sat in her office chair, staring at evidence of months of systematic betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion that had plagued me for months crystallized into something much more powerful. Absolute clarity about who my sister really was and what I needed to do to protect everything I'd built. Veronica wasn't just a skeptical sister expressing legitimate concerns about my business decisions. She was a predator who'd identified my success as a threat to her own status and was systematically working to eliminate that threat. She'd used our family relationship to gain access to confidential information, then weaponized that information against me with the kind of strategic thinking she applied to her consulting work. But in her meticulous documentation of my supposed weaknesses, Veronica had made a critical error. She'd created a comprehensive record of her own malicious intent, complete with timestamps, email drafts, and recorded evidence of her deception. Everything I needed to expose her campaign was sitting right there on her computer, carefully organized in folders that revealed the full scope of her betrayal. The sister I'd loved and admired for 29 years was gone, replaced by someone who saw my dreams as obstacles to be eliminated, rather than achievements to be celebrated. But her systematic approach to destruction had also provided me with the tools I needed to protect myself and ensure that her campaign would backfire in ways she could never have anticipated. That night, sitting in the home of someone I'd trusted completely, I realized that the biggest threat to my business hadn't been market competition or client challenges or investor skepticism. It had been the person who shared my DNA and knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to destroy my confidence from within. But Veronica's betrayal was about to become the catalyst for a level of success that would make all her sabotage efforts seem not just futile, but actually counterproductive. Because nothing motivates an entrepreneur like discovering that someone is actively working to destroy everything they've built, especially when that someone is supposed to love and support them unconditionally. The hours that followed my discovery in Veronica's office were among the most psychologically devastating of my life. As I sat surrounded by evidence of her systematic betrayal, copying files to my flash drive and photographing documents with trembling hands, I felt the foundation of my entire worldview cracking beneath me. The sister who had been my hero, my role model, and my emotional anchor for 29 years had revealed herself to be something I could never have imagined, a calculating enemy who had weaponized our family bond against me. What made the revelation so particularly crushing wasn't just the scope of her deception, It was the realization of how long she'd been planning it. The timestamps on her files revealed that her intervention strategy folder had been created just 3 weeks after I'd announced TechVantage's launch. This meant that while I was sharing my excitement about finally pursuing my entrepreneurial dreams, she was already developing plans to destroy them. Every memory of our interactions over the past 2 years became poisoned by this new knowledge. Her expressions of concern that I'd interpreted as sisterly worry were actually intelligence-gathering missions. Her offers to help with business planning weren't supportive gestures. They were attempts to gain access to confidential information she could later use against me. Even our childhood, which I'd always remembered as a time when she protected and encouraged me, now seemed tainted by the possibility that her support had always been conditional on my remaining safely beneath her in our family's success hierarchy. I spent the entire night in her apartment, unable to sleep, methodically documenting every piece of evidence while my mind raced through the implications of what I'd discovered. By dawn, I had compiled a comprehensive record of her campaign, 63 separate documents, 17 edited audio recordings, and a detailed timeline showing how her sabotage efforts had escalated alongside TechVantage's success. But the evidence collection was only part of what I was processing that night. The deeper psychological reckoning was far more complex and painful. I had to confront the reality that my closest family relationship had been built on a foundation of deception and manipulation. Worse, I had to acknowledge that my own success had triggered this betrayal, that by achieving what I'd worked for, I had somehow transformed my protector into my predator.
The most disturbing aspect was understanding how skillfully Veronica had exploited my psychological vulnerabilities. She knew exactly which criticisms would undermine my confidence because she'd spent years learning my insecurities and fears. She understood how to manipulate our parents' concerns because she'd observed their protective instincts toward both of us since childhood. She could predict my responses to stress and doubt because she'd watched me navigate challenges throughout our shared history. This wasn't random sabotage or spontaneous jealousy. It was psychological warfare, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of my emotional architecture. Veronica had turned our lifetime of shared experiences into a weapon system designed to destroy my professional aspirations and force me back into the subordinate role that preserved her identity as our family's primary success story. As morning light began filtering through her apartment windows, I heard the distinctive sound of her key in the front door. My heart hammered as I quickly closed all the computer files and returned to the guest bedroom, where I pretended to be reviewing my presentation materials for the Pacific Coast Entertainment meeting. The thought of facing her while knowing what I now knew about her true feelings felt almost impossible, but I needed to maintain normal appearances until I could determine my next steps. "Leah, I got your message about staying over," Veronica called out as she entered the apartment. "How did your meeting go yesterday?" Her voice carried the same warm, caring tone she'd always used with me, the voice of a loving big sister interested in my welfare. But now I could hear something underneath it that I'd never noticed before. A subtle, probing quality, as if she was fishing for information she could potentially use against me later. "It went really well," I replied, emerging from the guest room with my laptop bag. "They want me to present to their full executive team this morning." Veronica's smile was brilliant and seemed completely genuine. "That's wonderful! I'm so proud of you for landing such an important client. Pacific Coast Entertainment is a major player in the industry." But knowing what I now knew about her research files, I realized that her knowledge of my client's industry prominence wasn't casual familiarity. It was the result of deliberate investigation. She'd probably spent hours researching Pacific Coast Entertainment, looking for vulnerabilities she could exploit if my relationship with them became too successful. "Thanks," I said, watching her face carefully for any signs of the calculating predator I'd discovered hiding behind her sisterly facade. I should probably head over there soon to prepare. "Of course," she replied, moving toward the kitchen with the fluid grace that had always made her seem effortlessly sophisticated.
Do you want some coffee before you go? You know how I worry about you not taking care of yourself when you're focused on business. Even this simple offer of coffee felt loaded with new meaning. Was this genuine sisterly care, or was she hoping I'd stay longer and potentially reveal more information about my client relationship that she could add to her intelligence files? Every interaction now carried the weight of knowing that anything I said might be recorded, analyzed, and potentially weaponized against me. "I'm fine," I said, shouldering my bag and moving toward the door. "But thank you for letting me crash here last night. I really appreciate it." "Anytime, little sister," Veronica replied, using the affectionate term that had always made me feel protected and loved. Family has to stick together, right? The irony of her words was almost unbearable. As I walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of her home office, where just hours earlier I'd discovered evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal I could have imagined. The room looked innocent in the morning light, just another workspace in a successful consultant's apartment. But I now knew it was actually the command center for a systematic campaign designed to destroy everything I'd built. "Right," I managed to say, forcing a smile that probably looked as strained as it felt. "Family is everything." The drive to Pacific Coast Entertainment's offices in Century City felt surreal. Here I was, preparing for what could be the most important business presentation of my career, while simultaneously processing the discovery that my own sister had been working to sabotage my success for over 2 years. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to turn around, confront Veronica with the evidence, and demand an explanation, but another part of me recognized that I needed to protect my business interests before addressing our personal relationship. But perhaps most surprising was a third emotion that was beginning to emerge alongside the hurt and anger. A cold, focused determination unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Veronica's betrayal had certainly devastated me emotionally, but it had also provided me with something invaluable. Absolute clarity about what I was truly capable of achieving when I stopped seeking external validation and started trusting my own judgment completely. For 2 years, I'd been fighting 2 battles simultaneously, building a successful company while defending myself against constant criticism from the person whose opinion mattered most to me. Now I understood that those battles were actually connected, that Veronica's criticism had been strategically designed to undermine my confidence and limit my potential. With that psychological weight finally lifted, I felt like an athlete who'd been training with weights, suddenly allowed to run freely.
The Pacific Coast Entertainment presentation went better than I could have hoped. Without Veronica's voice in my head, questioning my qualifications and predicting failure, I was able to present TechVantage's capabilities with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your work speaks for itself. The executive team was impressed not just with our technical solutions, but with my leadership and vision for how technology could transform their entire business model. By the end of the meeting, they'd agreed to move forward with a pilot program that could potentially lead to a multi-million-dollar contract. Exactly the kind of breakthrough opportunity that Veronica had been working to prevent me from achieving. But more importantly, I'd proven to myself that my success wasn't dependent on her approval or anyone else's validation. TechVantage was successful because it solved real problems for real clients, not because my family believed in its potential. The drive back to Phoenix gave me 6 hours to process everything that had happened and develop a strategy for moving forward. I now possessed comprehensive evidence of Veronica's campaign against me, but I also understood that confronting her directly would likely lead to escalation rather than resolution. She'd invested too much time and energy in her sabotage efforts to simply abandon them when exposed. Instead, I needed to think strategically about how to protect TechVantage from future attacks while simultaneously using Veronica's own tactics against her. She'd taught me valuable lessons about the power of documentation, strategic planning, and patient execution. Now it was time to apply those lessons to ensure that her campaign of destruction became the catalyst for a level of success that would make
all her efforts not just futile, but actively counterproductive. The wounded little sister who'd spent years seeking Veronica's approval was gone, replaced by a strategic entrepreneur who understood that success was the best revenge. And I was about to demonstrate that lesson in ways that would shock not just Veronica, but everyone who'd underestimated what was possible when determination met opportunity. The transformation from devastated sister to strategic entrepreneur didn't happen overnight, but it began during that 6-hour drive back to Phoenix when I made the conscious decision to stop being Veronica's victim and start being her equal opponent. If she wanted to play corporate warfare games with my business and my life, then I would show her what someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove could accomplish when they stopped fighting defensively and started thinking like a winner. My first priority was protecting TechVantage from any future sabotage attempts while simultaneously positioning the company for explosive growth that would make Veronica's criticisms seem not just wrong, but embarrassingly short-sighted. I needed to move faster and more aggressively than she expected, achieving success at a pace that would outrun her ability to undermine my progress. The Monday morning after my LA discovery, I called an emergency meeting with my core team: Derek Chen, our head developer, Sarah Martinez, our operations manager who joined us 6 months earlier from a Fortune 500 company, and David Kim, our newest hire who specialized in enterprise sales. These were the people who'd believed in TechVantage's potential when it was still just ambitious ideas and prototype software, and they deserved to understand the challenges we were facing. I need to share something with all of you that affects our company's security and growth strategy, I began, choosing my words carefully. I couldn't reveal the personal details of Veronica's betrayal, but I could address the business implications without violating family privacy. I've discovered that someone with access to confidential information about our clients and operations has been conducting surveillance and potentially planning to sabotage our business relationships. The room went silent. Derek leaned forward with the intense focus he usually reserved for complex coding problems. Sarah's expression shifted into protective mode I'd seen when she dealt with difficult clients who tried to take advantage of our company's youth. David, whose enterprise sales experience included navigating corporate politics at much larger firms, immediately understood the implications. "Are we talking about corporate espionage?" David asked. "Because if so, we need to involve law enforcement and probably hire a cybersecurity firm to audit our systems." It's more complicated than traditional corporate espionage. But yes, we need to assume that someone has detailed knowledge of our client relationships, financial information, and strategic plans. Moving forward, we're implementing new security protocols and accelerating our growth timeline to outpace any potential interference. Over the following week, we transformed TechVantage's operations with military precision. We changed all passwords, implemented encrypted communication systems, and established protocols for compartmentalizing sensitive information. More importantly, we developed an aggressive expansion strategy that would make it impossible for external sabotage to slow our momentum. Sarah suggested that we pursue enterprise clients exclusively, focusing on contracts large enough that losing any single relationship wouldn't threaten our stability. David recommended that we establish partnerships with established technology firms who could provide credibility and protective buffer against criticism. Derek proposed that we accelerate our product development timeline, creating proprietary solutions that would differentiate us from competitors and make our services indispensable to clients.
But my most strategic decision was reaching out to Marcus Whitfield, a venture capital partner at Summit Ridge Ventures who'd been pursuing TechVantage for months. Marcus had built a reputation for identifying high-potential startups and providing them with the resources needed for rapid scaling. More importantly, his portfolio companies had access to enterprise clients, strategic partnerships, and the kind of industry credibility that would make external criticism irrelevant. "Amelia," Marcus said when I called to schedule a meeting, "I've been hoping you'd be ready to discuss Series A funding. Your company's trajectory has been impressive, and we think TechVantage has the potential to become a market leader in enterprise software solutions."
The timing was perfect. Rather than the gradual, careful growth strategy I'd originally planned, Veronica's betrayal had forced me to think bigger and move faster. If she wanted to undermine a small startup struggling to establish credibility, I would deny her that target by transforming TechVantage into a well-funded company with institutional backing and enterprise-level clients. The funding discussions with Summit Ridge Ventures revealed opportunities I hadn't previously considered. Marcus introduced me to portfolio companies that needed exactly the kinds of solutions TechVantage specialized in developing. More importantly, he connected me with other entrepreneurs who'd faced similar challenges of building credibility in industries dominated by established players. The key, Marcus explained during one of our strategy sessions, is achieving escape velocity. Once your company reaches a certain level of success and recognition, external criticism becomes irrelevant because your results speak louder than anyone's opinions. This concept of escape velocity became central to my counter-strategy against Veronica's campaign. Instead of defending TechVantage against her attacks, I would make those attacks meaningless by achieving success at a scale that rendered them absurd. If she wanted to call my business fake, I would build something so substantial and successful that her words would reflect more on her judgment than on my company's legitimacy. The breakthrough moment came when Southwest Airlines, following up on their interest from my Austin presentation, formally invited TechVantage to bid on a comprehensive system integration project. This wasn't the pilot program they'd originally discussed. It was a full-scale implementation that could transform our company overnight. The contract was worth $12 million over 3 years, with potential for expansion to other major carriers if our solutions proved successful. But landing the Southwest contract would require more than just technical expertise and competitive pricing. It would require demonstrating the kind of organizational maturity and leadership capability that typically took companies years to develop. I needed to prove that TechVantage wasn't just a small startup with good ideas, but a legitimate technology partner capable of handling enterprise-level commitments. This is where Veronica's betrayal actually became an unexpected advantage. Her systematic documentation of my supposed weaknesses had forced me to examine every aspect of TechVantage's operations with critical precision. Her files had identified genuine areas where we needed improvement, and addressing those vulnerabilities had made us stronger than we would have been without her adversarial perspectives. More importantly, months of defending my decisions against her criticism had prepared me for the kind of rigorous due diligence that enterprise clients demand. When Southwest's procurement team asked tough questions about our project management capabilities, financial stability, and scalability plans, I was ready with comprehensive answers backed by detailed documentation and strategic thinking. The presentation to Southwest Airlines was scheduled for December 15th, just 6 weeks after my discovery in Veronica's apartment. As I prepared for what could be the most important business presentation of my career, I realized that everything had changed in the few weeks since I'd stopped seeking her approval and started trusting my own judgment. TechVantage's team had expanded to 12 employees, all recruited from top-tier companies and universities. Our client portfolio included 3 Fortune 500 companies and 7 mid-size enterprises that were generating consistent revenue and positive references. Our technology platform had evolved into a comprehensive suite of enterprise solutions that competitors were already trying to replicate. Most importantly, I had transformed from an entrepreneur who questioned her own qualifications to a CEO who understood that confidence comes from competence, not from external validation. Veronica's campaign had been designed to keep me small and dependent on her approval. Instead, it had forced me to grow into the kind of leader who could command respect in any boardroom and deliver results that spoke louder than any critic's voice. But I wasn't just building a successful company, I was constructing a platform for the kind of vindication that would make Veronica's years of sabotage seem not just futile, but actively counterproductive. Every contract we landed, every milestone we achieved, every recognition we received would serve as evidence that her judgment had been catastrophically wrong. The Southwest presentation would be more than just a business pitch. It would be the moment when TechVantage achieved the escape velocity that would make all future criticism irrelevant. And if we landed that contract, it would trigger a growth trajectory that would culminate in the kind of success story that turns skeptics into believers and enemies into footnotes in someone else's triumph narrative.
Veronica had wanted to destroy my business to preserve her identity as our family's primary success story. Instead, she was about to witness the creation of a success story so dramatic that it would redefine what anyone in our family had ever considered possible. The sister who'd called my dreams fake was about to discover what real achievement looked like when determination met preparation and opportunity. While I was focused on protecting TechVantage and preparing for the Southwest Airlines presentation, a disturbing pattern began emerging that transformed my understanding of Veronica's behavior from personal betrayal into something far more sinister and systematic. What I'd initially assumed was sibling rivalry motivated by jealousy revealed itself to be part of a much larger pattern of behavior that had affected multiple people across different areas of her life. The first hint came from an unexpected source. During a routine LinkedIn networking session, I received a message from someone named Jennifer Walsh, a former colleague of Veronica's from her previous position at Hartwell & Associates, the consulting firm she'd worked for before joining Morrison & Associates in Los Angeles. Jennifer's message was carefully worded, but clearly fishing for information about my sister's current activities. "Hi, Amelia," her message read. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I saw that you're Veronica Rodriguez's sister. I worked with her at Hartwell a few years ago, and I've been trying to reconnect with some former colleagues. Would you happen to know if she's still in the consulting industry? I'd love to catch up with her about some mutual professional interests." Something about the message felt off, too casual for a simple networking inquiry, but too careful for a genuine friendship reconnection. I decided to call Jennifer directly, claiming I was helping Veronica update her professional network and wanted to make sure I had current contact information for her former colleagues. "Oh," Jennifer said after a long pause when I mentioned Veronica's name. "I wasn't sure if you'd be comfortable discussing... Well, I wasn't sure what your family knew about what happened at Hartwell." My stomach dropped. What happened at Hartwell? Jennifer hesitated for several seconds before speaking. "Maybe we should meet in person. I'm actually based in Phoenix now, and there are some things about your sister's time at our firm that you should probably know about, especially if you're working with her on any professional projects." We met 3 days later at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, and what Jennifer told me completely recontextualized everything I thought I knew about Veronica's character and capabilities. According to Jennifer, Veronica hadn't left Hartwell & Associates for a better opportunity at Morrison & Associates. She'd been quietly forced out after a systematic campaign to undermine a colleague named Michael Torres, a junior consultant who'd been gaining recognition for innovative client solutions. Michael was brilliant, Jennifer explained, stirring her coffee nervously. He'd developed some groundbreaking approaches to supply chain optimization that were getting attention from senior partners. He was being fast-tracked for promotion, which meant he would have been competing directly with Veronica for advancement opportunities. The story that emerged was chillingly familiar. Veronica had befriended Michael, positioning herself as a mentor and ally, while secretly documenting his projects, client interactions, and strategic approaches. She'd then used this information to undermine his credibility with clients and colleagues, much the same way she'd been attacking my business relationships. She was so subtle about it, Jennifer continued. She'd express concern about Michael's workload, suggest that he might be taking on too much too quickly, question whether he had enough experience for high-profile clients. But she always framed it as caring support rather than criticism. The parallels to her treatment of me were unmistakable. Veronica had perfected these tactics through practice on professional colleagues before deploying them against her own sister. But according to Jennifer, Michael's situation had escalated beyond psychological manipulation into more serious professional sabotage. She started feeding information to competitors, Jennifer revealed. Michael lost 2 major client presentations because rival firms seemed to know exactly what he was proposing and could undercut his recommendations. It took months for anyone to figure out that the leak was coming from inside our own company. When the truth finally emerged, Hartwell's senior partners had faced a difficult decision. Veronica was a high-performing consultant with excellent client relationships and no obvious evidence of wrongdoing. All the sabotage had been carefully planned to avoid direct attribution. Michael, meanwhile, had suffered a series of professional failures that made him appear incompetent despite his genuine talent and innovative ideas.
They couldn't prove what she had done, but they understood what had happened. The solution was to quietly encourage Veronica to pursue opportunities elsewhere while helping Michael rebuild his reputation and client relationships. This revelation forced me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about Veronica's career trajectory. Her move to Morrison & Associates wasn't the result of her exceptional talent being recognized by a more prestigious firm. It was an escape route from a situation where her predatory behavior had been discovered by colleagues who understood exactly what she was capable of doing.
But Jennifer's story was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, I began reaching out to other people in Veronica's professional and social networks, carefully probing for information about her behavior patterns and relationship dynamics. What I discovered painted a picture of someone who had weaponized personal relationships throughout her adult life whenever she perceived threats to her status or success. Rachel Kim, a former Stanford classmate, described how Veronica had systematically undermined her during their senior year when Rachel had been selected for a prestigious internship that Veronica had also wanted. She convinced our study group that Rachel was struggling with the material and might need extra help, Rachel told me during a phone conversation. But really, she was gathering information about Rachel's preparation strategies and sharing them with other candidates who were competing for similar opportunities. Mark Stevens, a former boyfriend from her college years, revealed an even more disturbing pattern of behavior during their relationship. Veronica had this way of making you feel like she was the only person who really understood you, he explained. But she'd use the personal things you shared with her to manipulate situations later. If we had arguments, she'd bring up vulnerabilities I'd confided in her as weapons to win the fight. Most shocking was a conversation with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychology professor at Stanford, who'd served as Veronica's academic advisor during her undergraduate years. Dr. Vasquez had maintained contact with many former students, but her memories of Veronica were particularly vivid. She was an exceptional student academically, Dr. Vasquez told me, but there were concerns about her interpersonal relationships and competitive behaviors. She had a pattern of befriending classmates who she perceived as threats, then using personal information against them in ways that were psychologically sophisticated but difficult to prove or address through normal academic channels. These conversations revealed that Veronica's campaign against my business wasn't an aberration triggered by sibling rivalry. It was the latest iteration of a behavioral pattern she'd been perfecting for over a decade. She had consistently identified people whose success threatened her own status, then used manipulation, betrayal, and psychological warfare to eliminate or neutralize those threats. More disturbing was the realization that her tactics had evolved and become more sophisticated over time. Her early attempts at Stanford had been relatively crude psychological manipulation. Her campaign against Michael Torres at Hartwell involved professional sabotage and strategic information leaking. Her assault on my business represented the culmination of years of practice, combining psychological manipulation, systematic intelligence gathering, professional sabotage, and family relationship exploitation into a comprehensive attack strategy. But perhaps most chilling was understanding that I wasn't just dealing with a jealous sister. I was facing someone who had spent years developing expertise in destroying people's careers and personal relationships. Veronica had turned predatory behavior into a specialized skill set. And she'd been practicing on colleagues, classmates, and romantic partners long before she had decided that my success represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. This knowledge transformed my strategic thinking completely. I wasn't just protecting TechVantage from family drama or sibling rivalry. I was defending against someone who had successfully destroyed multiple careers and relationships using sophisticated psychological and professional warfare tactics. The stakes were higher than I'd realized, but so was my understanding of what I was truly capable of achieving when I stopped underestimating both my opponent and myself. The pattern of predation also revealed Veronica's greatest weakness. She'd never faced a target who discovered her methods and chose to fight back strategically rather than defensively. Every previous victim had been isolated, confused, and gradually worn down by her systematic attacks. But I had advantages that Michael Torres and her other victims hadn't possessed. I had comprehensive documentation of her methods, I understood her psychological tactics, and most importantly, I had a business that was growing too rapidly for her sabotage efforts to keep pace. Veronica had spent years perfecting the art of destroying other people's success. She was about to discover what happened when someone refused to be destroyed and instead used her attacks as motivation to achieve success at a scale that would make her previous victories seem insignificant by comparison. The predator was about to meet a prey that had evolved into something much more dangerous than she had anticipated. Armed with the knowledge that Veronica was a serial predator rather than just a jealous sister, I realized that defeating her required more than simply achieving business success. It demanded a strategic response that would expose her pattern of behavior and protect her future victims. The upcoming Southwest Airlines presentation had evolved from a business opportunity into something much more significant, the launching pad for a level of success that would make her years of sabotage not just ineffective, but publicly embarrassing. My strategy crystallized around a concept I called overwhelming evidence, achieving success so dramatic and undeniable that anyone who had dismissed my capabilities would be forced to confront their own poor judgment. But more importantly, I needed to create a situation where Veronica's attempts to undermine my achievements would reveal her true character to our family and professional network.
The first phase involved accelerating TechVantage's growth beyond anything Veronica could have anticipated or prepared for. Working with Marcus Whitfield at Summit Ridge Ventures, we developed an aggressive expansion timeline that would transform my company from a regional startup into a national technology leader within 18 months. The Series A funding round was structured to provide not just capital, but strategic partnerships with established enterprise clients who needed exactly the solutions we'd been developing. "What you're proposing is ambitious to the point of being audacious," Marcus said during one of our planning sessions, "but your company's trajectory and market position suggest it's actually achievable. The question is whether you're prepared for the intensity of scaling this rapidly." I was more than prepared. I was energized by the challenge. Every conversation with Veronica's former victims had reinforced my understanding that she targeted people who accepted limitations and doubted their own capabilities. The best defense against her psychological warfare was to become someone whose success was so overwhelming that her criticism became obviously absurd. The Southwest Airlines presentation was scheduled for December 15th, but I'd learned that their decision timeline coincided perfectly with their fiscal year planning cycle. If we could secure that contract, it would position TechVantage for additional enterprise clients who are making similar technology infrastructure decisions for the following year. One success could trigger an avalanche of opportunities that would propel us far beyond Veronica's ability to influence or understand. But I wasn't just preparing for business success. I was documenting everything for the eventual confrontation that would expose Veronica's behavior to our family. Every email she sent expressing concern about my business decisions was saved and categorized. Every conversation where she planted doubts about my capabilities was recorded with her knowledge and consent, using the same techniques I'd discovered in her files. "I'm just worried that you might be expanding too quickly," she said during one of our weekly phone calls, unaware that I was systematically gathering evidence of her attempts to limit my growth. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, knowing that her words were being preserved for future reference. "But our investors and clients seem confident in our trajectory. Maybe their professional expertise carries more weight than family opinions about business strategy." The subtle pushback was intentional. I wanted Veronica to understand that her influence over my decision-making was diminishing, which would likely trigger more aggressive sabotage attempts that would be easier to document and prove to skeptical family members. Sure enough, Her efforts escalated exactly as I had predicted. She began reaching out to contacts in Phoenix's business community, ostensibly seeking advice about how to support her sister's entrepreneurial journey, but actually spreading carefully crafted doubt about my company's stability and my own qualifications for managing rapid growth. But this time, her intelligence was outdated and her targets were strategically important to my business. When she contacted Patricia Valdez, the procurement director at Arizona Public Service, to express concerns about TechVantage's capacity for large-scale implementations, she didn't know that APS had already become one of our reference clients after a successful pilot program. Patricia called me immediately to report the strange conversation with her sister and to confirm that there were no actual problems with our services. She seemed very concerned about your company's ability to handle complex implementations, Patricia told me. But given our experience working with your team, her concerns seemed completely disconnected from reality. I thought you should know that someone claiming to be your sister was actively discouraging potential business relationships. This was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. Third-party witnesses who could confirm that Veronica was actively working to sabotage my business relationships while positioning herself as a caring family member. Each incident provided additional documentation for the comprehensive case I was building against her. Meanwhile, TechVantage's momentum was becoming unstoppable. The Pacific Coast Entertainment contract had led to referrals from 3 other production companies. Our success with Pinnacle Logistics had generated interest from transportation companies across the Southwest. The Arizona Public Service pilot program had proven our capacity for utility-scale technology implementations. Each success made Veronica's predictions of failure seem more obviously motivated by personal agenda rather than professional insight. But the most significant development came when Crestwood Ventures, the prestigious VC firm that had originally shown interest in our Series A round, reached out with an unexpected proposal. They weren't just interested in funding our current growth. They wanted to discuss positioning TechVantage for an eventual initial public offering. Your company's growth trajectory and market position are exceptional, explained Catherine Morrison, Crestwood's managing partner, during a confidential meeting in their Scottsdale offices. We're seeing early indicators that suggest TechVantage could become a category-defining company in enterprise software solutions. If current trends continue, you could be looking at IPO readiness within 3 to 5 years. The conversation was surreal. Here was one of the most respected venture capital firms in the country discussing the possibility of taking my company public, the same company that Veronica had been calling a pathetic fantasy and projecting would fail within months. The irony was almost too perfect to believe.
But Catherine's assessment wasn't based on optimistic projections or wishful thinking. TechVantage's financial metrics, client retention rates, and market position were genuinely exceptional for a company our size and age. Our enterprise clients were reporting measurable improvements in efficiency and cost savings that made our services essentially indispensable. More importantly, we developed proprietary technology solutions that larger competitors were already trying to acquire or replicate. The question, Catherine continued, is whether you're prepared for the kind of scrutiny and pressure that comes with being a public company CEO. Going public means your business performance becomes a matter of public record, and your leadership decisions will be evaluated by analysts, investors, and media outlets who won't hesitate to criticize what they perceive as mistakes or weaknesses. I almost laughed at the irony. After 2 years of defending my decisions against systematic criticism from someone whose goal was to destroy my confidence, the prospect of facing public market scrutiny seemed almost refreshingly straightforward. At least financial analysts and business journalists would be evaluating my performance based on objective metrics, rather than personal vendettas disguised as family concern. I think I've had excellent preparation for that kind of pressure, I replied. Sometimes the best training for public criticism comes from learning to trust your own judgment despite negative input from people whose motives aren't aligned with your success. The Southwest Airlines presentation was now just 3 weeks away, and everything was falling into place for what would be either TechVantage's breakthrough moment or a missed opportunity that could set us back significantly. But I was no longer worried about the outcome in the way I would have been before discovering Veronica's true nature. Win or lose, I understood that my company's value wasn't dependent on any single contract or external validation. More importantly, I'd created a situation where Veronica's years of predatory behavior would finally be exposed to consequences she couldn't manipulate or escape. Whether through overwhelming business success that made her criticism obviously wrong, or through documented evidence of her sabotage campaigns that revealed her true character to our family, the sister who'd spent years calling my dreams fake was about to discover what real accountability looked like. The trap was set, the evidence was documented, and the stage was prepared for a confrontation that would demonstrate the difference between someone who builds and someone who destroys. Veronica had spent years perfecting the art of tearing down other people's achievements. She was about to learn what happened when her target refused to be torn down and instead used her attacks as motivation to build something too substantial to be destroyed by jealousy, manipulation, or fear. December 15th arrived with the crisp clarity of a Phoenix winter morning, carrying with it the weight of everything I'd worked toward for the past 3 years. The Southwest Airlines presentation wasn't just a business meeting, it was the culmination of a journey that had transformed me from a hopeful entrepreneur seeking her sister's approval into a strategic CEO ready to command respect in any boardroom. But before I could face Southwest's executive team, I had to navigate a confrontation that would finally expose Veronica's true character to our family. The timing was perfect in a way that felt almost orchestrated by fate. Our parents, Carlos and Rosa, had planned a family dinner the evening before my presentation, wanting to celebrate what they called my big opportunity with Southwest Airlines. Veronica had flown in from Los Angeles specifically for the occasion, positioning herself as the supportive older sister who wanted to be present for her little sister's important moment. But I knew her real motivation was to deliver one final psychological blow that would undermine my confidence before the most crucial presentation of my career. The dinner was held at Casa Rodriguez, our favorite family restaurant in Scottsdale, where we'd celebrated every major milestone since childhood. Our parents, Carlos and Rosa, had invited our Aunt Carmen and Uncle Roberto, along with my cousins Patricia and Miguel, creating an audience that would witness everything that was about to unfold. Veronica arrived looking stunning as always, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, radiating the kind of effortless sophistication that had always made her the center of attention at family gatherings. I'm so proud of Amelia for getting this opportunity with Southwest Airlines. It's such a big step up from the smaller projects she's been working on. I just hope she's prepared for the complexity of dealing with a Fortune 500 company. The comment was designed to plant doubt about my qualifications while appearing supportive, following the exact pattern I documented throughout her campaign against my business. But this time, I was ready with a response that would begin exposing her true motivations to our family. Actually, I pulled out my phone to display the TechVamage client portfolio. We've been working with Fortune 500 companies for over a year now. Pacific Coast Entertainment, Pinnacle Logistics, and Arizona Public Service are all major enterprise clients who've been extremely satisfied with our services. The Southwest opportunity is exciting, but it's not actually a step up in complexity. It's just a larger scale of the work we've already proven we can handle successfully.
I watched Veronica's expression carefully as I presented this information, noting the flash of annoyance that crossed her face when she realized her intelligence about my business was outdated and inaccurate. Our parents looked confused by the discrepancy between her concerns and my actual client base, which was exactly the kind of doubt I needed to plant about her credibility. Well, Veronica recovered quickly, I'm sure those companies have been happy with your work so far. I just worry about what happens when you're dealing with the kind of scrutiny and pressure that comes with Southwest's scale of operations. Sometimes smaller companies bite off more than they can chew when they try to compete with established enterprise solution providers. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Instead of defending my capabilities, I decided to address her pattern of behavior directly, using the evidence I'd gathered to expose her systematic campaign of sabotage. Veronica,
I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone at the table pay attention. I've been thinking about your concerns about my business over the past 2 years. You've predicted failure at every major milestone: when I landed my first client, when I secured seed funding, when I hired employees, when I was invited to speak at industry conferences. At some point, doesn't the consistent inaccuracy of your predictions suggest that maybe your concerns aren't based on business expertise, but on something else entirely? The table went silent. Our father, Carlos, looked uncomfortable with the tension that had suddenly emerged between our daughters. Our mother, Rosa, appeared confused about why a celebration dinner had turned into what sounded like a confrontation. But I could see understanding beginning to dawn in our Aunt Carmen's eyes. She'd always been the most perceptive member of our family. Veronica's mask began to slip as she realized that I was no longer accepting her criticism passively. I'm just trying to protect you from disappointment, Leah. Sometimes family members have to be realistic about limitations when everyone else is just telling you what you want to hear. That's interesting, I replied, pulling out my tablet to display screenshots of her research files that I'd photographed in her apartment last month. Because I've discovered that your protection involves systematic research into my clients, detailed documentation of my business vulnerabilities, and strategic outreach to my professional contacts to plant doubt about my company's capabilities. The color drained from Veronica's face as she recognized her own files being displayed to our family. Our parents stared at the screen in shock, trying to process what they were seeing. The spreadsheets, voice recordings, and strategic planning documents were undeniable evidence of a calculated campaign rather than sisterly concern. Amelia, what is this? Our father asked, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, disappointment mixed with confusion about his eldest daughter's behavior. This is what I found on Veronica's computer when I stayed at her apartment last month, I explained, displaying the timeline and targets document that laid out her systematic strategy for undermining my business. She's been conducting surveillance on my company for over 2 years, gathering intelligence about my clients and employees, and actively working to sabotage my professional relationships. Mother gasped audibly when she saw the edited voice recordings and the notes about creating evidence of my supposed incompetence. Veronica, please tell me this isn't what it looks like, Rosa said, her voice breaking with the pain of a mother discovering that one child had been systematically trying to destroy the other's dreams. But the evidence was too comprehensive and detailed to deny or explain away. Veronica sat frozen as I displayed email drafts she'd prepared to send to my clients, notes about my investors' backgrounds, and most damning of all, her written goal of ensuring my inevitable collapse so I would return to the family as a humbled prodigal daughter. "Why would you do this to your own sister?" Patricia asked, speaking for everyone at the table who was struggling to understand how family love could be transformed into such calculated betrayal. Veronica's response revealed the depth of her psychological investment in my failure. Instead of expressing remorse or attempting to justify her behavior, she doubled down on her narrative of superior judgment and protective motivation. "I'm just trying to protect you from disappointment, Leah. Sometimes family members have to be realistic about limitations when everyone else is just telling you what you want to hear."
But I wasn't finished exposing the full scope of her behavior. "This isn't just about me," I said, displaying the information I'd gathered about her previous victims. "Veronica has been using these same tactics throughout her career. She destroyed a colleague named Michael Torres at her previous company, sabotaged classmates at Stanford, and manipulated personal relationships whenever she perceived threats to her status." The revelation that this was a pattern rather than an isolated incident transformed our family's understanding of who Veronica really was. The golden child who'd seemed perfect in every way had been systematically destroying other people's success for years, using her intelligence and social skills as weapons rather than tools for building positive relationships. Our father, Carlos, spoke with the quiet authority that had made him an effective teacher for 30 years. "Veronica, I'm ashamed that a daughter of mine could be capable of such calculated cruelty toward her own sister and other innocent people. This isn't the person your mother and I raised you to be." But perhaps the most powerful moment came when our mother, Rosa, who had always been Veronica's strongest supporter and proudest advocate, spoke with tears in her eyes. "How could you try to destroy something so beautiful that your sister built? How could you take her trust and love and use them as weapons against her?" Veronica had no answer because there was no answer that could justify what she'd done. Her years of perfectionism and success had hidden a fundamental character flaw that was now exposed to the people whose opinions mattered most to her. The family gathering she'd attended to deliver one final blow to my confidence had instead become the moment when her true nature was revealed to everyone who'd once admired her achievements. As I looked around the table at my family's shocked and disappointed faces, I realized that the confrontation I'd been preparing for had achieved everything I'd hoped for and more. Veronica's pattern of predatory behavior was no longer a secret that she could hide behind professional success and superficial charm. The sister who'd spent years calling my business fake had been exposed as someone whose own character was built on deception and manipulation. But the most satisfying aspect wasn't the exposure of her betrayal. It was the knowledge that tomorrow's presentation with Southwest Airlines would demonstrate just how wrong she'd been about everything. The business she'd called a pathetic fantasy was about to achieve success at a scale that would make her years of sabotage seem not just cruel, but embarrassingly short-sighted. The Southwest Airlines presentation took place at 9 a.m. the following morning, just 12 hours after Veronica's public unmasking at our family dinner. As I walked into the gleaming conference room at Southwest's headquarters in Dallas, accompanied by Derek, Sarah, and David from my team, I felt a clarity and confidence that would have been impossible before discovering my sister's true nature. The psychological weight of seeking her approval had been replaced by the unshakable knowledge that my company's value didn't depend on anyone's opinion, it depended on results. The presentation went flawlessly. For 90 minutes, we demonstrated how TechVantage's integrated solutions could transform Southwest's entire technology infrastructure, reducing operational costs by 30% while improving system reliability and customer experience. The executive team asked challenging questions about scalability, implementation timelines, and long-term maintenance. But every concern was addressed with the kind of comprehensive planning that comes from years of experience with similar enterprise deployments. When Southwest's CTO, Amanda Chen, announced that they were awarding TechVantage the $12 million contract with an option for expansion to additional airlines in their partnership network, I felt vindicated in ways that went far beyond business success. This wasn't just about landing a major client, it was proof that every prediction Veronica had made about my company's limitations had been catastrophically wrong. But the Southwest contract was only the beginning of what would become the most extraordinary period of growth in TechVantage's history. Word of our success with a major airline spread rapidly through enterprise technology circles, triggering an avalanche of interest from companies that had been waiting to see proof of our capabilities at scale. Within 6 months, we'd signed contracts with 3 additional airlines, 2 major retail chains, and a Fortune 100 manufacturing company. The Series A funding round with Summit Ridge Ventures closed at $18 million, nearly double our original projections, based on our expanded client portfolio and proven track record with enterprise implementations. More importantly, Catherine Morrison at Crestwood Ventures accelerated her timeline for discussing an initial public offering, suggesting that TechVantage's growth trajectory could support going public within 2 years, rather than the original 3 to 5-year estimate. Meanwhile, Veronica's career and personal relationships began experiencing the kind of systematic collapse that she'd spent years orchestrating for others. The family dinner confrontation had been recorded with everyone's consent, and excerpts of her confession about sabotaging my business circulated through our extended family and social networks. Her reputation as the golden child who could do no wrong was replaced by a growing understanding that her success had been built on deliberately destroying other people's opportunities.
More damaging was the professional fallout when her pattern of predatory behavior became known within Los Angeles consulting circles. Jennifer Walsh, Michael Torres, and several other victims came forward with their own stories of Veronica's systematic sabotage campaigns. Morrison and Associates conducted an internal investigation that revealed she'd been using similar tactics against colleagues at her current firm, positioning herself for promotions by undermining competitors
rather than through superior performance. The consulting industry's tight-knit professional networks ensured that her reputation for manipulative behavior followed her to every potential employer, making it nearly impossible to find another position at a prestigious firm. But perhaps most satisfying was watching our parents' relationship with Veronica transform from pride and admiration to disappointment and conditional support. Carlos and Rosa didn't cut contact with their eldest daughter, but they made it clear that rebuilding their trust would require genuine remorse and efforts to make amends to the people she'd harmed. The unconditional celebration of her achievements was replaced by careful scrutiny of her motivations and behavior. "We raised you to lift other people up, not tear them down," our father told her during a difficult family conversation. "If you want to be part of this family, you need to understand that love means supporting each other's success, not sabotaging it out of jealousy." The personal vindication was deeply satisfying, but it was overshadowed by the extraordinary business success that followed. TechVantage's growth accelerated beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I'd first started the company in my apartment 3 years earlier. We expanded to 47 employees, opened offices in 3 additional cities, and developed proprietary technology solutions that established us as innovation leaders in enterprise software integration. The moment that completed my transformation from wounded sister to vindicated entrepreneur came on a warm Tuesday morning in March, exactly 18 months after the Southwest Airlines presentation. I was reviewing quarterly financial reports when my phone buzzed with a notification that would have seemed impossible when Veronica was calling my business a pathetic fantasy. TechVantage Solutions was going public. The initial public offering launched at $42 per share, valuing the company at $320 million and making my majority ownership stake worth more than $200 million. Within hours of trading beginning, our stock price had climbed to $58 per share, reflecting investor confidence in our growth potential and market position. But the numbers weren't what made the moment so profound. It was the realization of how completely my life had been transformed by refusing to accept anyone else's limitations on my potential. The sister who'd spent years predicting my failure was now watching my name appear on financial news networks as one of the youngest female CEOs to take a company public in our sector's history. The media attention was overwhelming but validating. Forbes featured me on their 30 Under 30 list, highlighting TechVantage's rapid growth and innovative approach to enterprise software solutions. Harvard Business Review published a case study about our company's scaling strategies, using our success as an example of how startups could compete effectively with established enterprise technology providers. Most significantly, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Southwest Technology Summit, the same conference where I'd first spoken as a nervous 26-year-old entrepreneur hoping to establish credibility in my industry. This time, I was returning as a proven leader whose company had become one of the most successful IPO debuts in recent memory. During my keynote speech, I shared the story of TechVantage's journey without mentioning Veronica by name, but the lessons were clear to anyone who understood the challenges of building something significant while facing systematic doubt and sabotage from people who should have been supporters. The most dangerous obstacles to your success, I told the audience of entrepreneurs and executives, aren't market competition or funding challenges or technical difficulties. They're the people who tell you to think smaller, dream less ambitiously, and accept limitations that exist only in their own minds. Sometimes those people are strangers who don't understand your vision, but sometimes they're family members who are more invested in maintaining existing dynamics than celebrating your growth. The speech was recorded and shared widely across social media and business networks, generating discussions about family dynamics, entrepreneurial resilience, and the importance of trusting your own judgment despite external criticism. Several audience members approached me afterward to share their own stories of overcoming doubt from people who should have been their biggest supporters. But perhaps most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Michael Torres, the colleague whose career Veronica had destroyed at Hartwell and Associates, reached out to congratulate me on TechVantage's IPO and to thank me for exposing her pattern of predatory behavior. Watching her face consequences for what she did to all of us feels like justice, he wrote in his email. But seeing you succeed despite her attempts to destroy your confidence proves that predators don't always win. Sometimes their victims become stronger than they ever imagined possible.
His words captured exactly what my journey had demonstrated, that betrayal, when survived and overcome, can become the foundation for achievements that would have been impossible without that adversity. Veronica's systematic campaign to undermine my confidence had actually forced me to develop the kind of unshakable self-belief that made extraordinary success possible. The final chapter in our relationship came during a chance encounter at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, 6 months after TechVantage's IPO. I was traveling to New York for investor meetings when I spotted Veronica at a gate, apparently waiting for a flight to Los Angeles, where she was attempting to rebuild her career as an independent consultant. She looked different, older, less polished, with the kind of wariness that comes from having your carefully constructed image collapse publicly. When she noticed me, her expression cycled through emotions I'd never seen on her face before: shame, regret, and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Leah," she said, approaching hesitantly, "I heard about the IPO. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice neutral but not hostile. The anger and hurt that had once consumed me when thinking about her betrayal had been replaced by something closer to pity for someone who destroyed relationships and opportunities out of insecurity and jealousy. "I've been thinking about what happened between us," she continued, struggling to find words for a conversation she'd probably rehearsed many times. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was about everything. Your success proves that I never understood what you were capable of achieving." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from someone whose pride had always made admitting mistakes nearly impossible. But more importantly, it was acknowledgement that every prediction she'd made about my company's limitations had been proven spectacularly wrong. "I appreciate you saying that, but honestly, your doubt probably made me stronger and more determined than I would have been with your support. Sometimes the best motivation comes from proving wrong the people who underestimate you." As I walked away toward my gate, I reflected on how completely our roles had reversed. The sister who'd once seemed to have everything, beauty, intelligence, career success, family pride, had lost much of what she'd valued by trying to prevent me from achieving what I dreamed of. Meanwhile, the dreamer she'd dismissed as unrealistic had built something that exceeded even my own most ambitious expectations. The story of TechVantage's success became a case study taught in business schools and entrepreneurship programs, demonstrating how determination, strategic thinking, and refusal to accept others' limitations could transform a small startup into a publicly traded company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But for me, the real lesson wasn't about business strategy or market opportunity. It was about the power of believing in yourself when no one will, and the extraordinary achievements that become possible when you stop seeking approval from people who are more invested in your limitations than your potential. Today, TechVantage employs over 200 people across 6 cities, with annual revenue approaching $100 million and a market capitalization that continues growing as we expand into new sectors and international markets. I've been featured on the covers of business magazines, invited to speak at conferences around the world, and recognized as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs of my generation. But perhaps the achievement I'm proudest of is the mentorship program I established for entrepreneurs who are facing doubt and sabotage from people who should be supporting their dreams. Every month, I meet with startup founders who are struggling with criticism from family members, friends, or colleagues who can't envision their success. Remember, I tell them,
The people who try to limit your dreams are usually afraid of what your success might reveal about their own missed opportunities. Don't let their fear become your ceiling. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. Sometimes predators face consequences for their behavior. And sometimes the people who are dismissed as unrealistic dreamers prove that reality has no limits for those brave enough to refuse other people's definitions of what's possible. The sister who called my business fake learned that success speaks louder than criticism. And the woman whose dreams were called pathetic fantasies proved that the only fantasy was thinking that family loyalty requires accepting limitations designed by jealousy and fear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.